I think for me, the key is aligning your exhibition strategy with your business growth plan. I think knowing why you exhibit and what it actually means for your business to go to that exhibition is the real starting point. Okay, we see, as we were talking earlier, we see a lot of companies who are exhibiting for the wrong reasons. And this is where they are making the first mistake. And they haven't got the right strategy. It's not aligned with the rest of the business, and it's in silo to the sales and the marketing strategy as well.
Welcome to the H-Files, the new series of the Hands-On Business podcast, where we dive deep into the world of healthcare leadership and the unique challenges facing small to medium-sized healthcare businesses. I'm Hakeem Adebiyi, and after years of helping businesses grow in various industries, I'm excited to focus on the area that I know the best, healthcare, one of the most dynamic and impactful sectors in the world today. In this series, we're going to explore what it takes to lead and grow in healthcare, from navigating the complexities of regulation and innovation to overcoming the everyday hurdles of building a sustainable business in this fast-paced environment. Each episode will feature real-world insights, expert interviews, and actionable strategies that can help you push your healthcare business forward. So whether you're a leader in the space or an entrepreneur ready to break into it, the H-Files is here to give you the edge. Medica, Arab Health, ACOG, ASCO, I could go on. These are all well-known healthcare conferences, and the booths are booked, the banners are printed, the brochures are stacked. But here's the reality. Most medtech companies just show up and very few actually stand out. Now, too many teams invest thousands, and I mean thousands, if not tens of thousands, into attending global healthcare events. But they leave with little more than a few scan badges, sore backs, and blisters on their feet. So in this episode of the H-Files, I'm joined by Lee Ali, international exhibition expert and founder of Expo Stars, and he's going to help us break down what it really takes to turn your conference presence into commercial impact. So Lee's going to share what separates the passive booths from the powerful ones, and how any company, no matter what size, can train their team, prep, plan, and engage like professionals at conferences with the intention of getting real commercial outcomes. So if you're tired of just showing up at conferences, this episode hopefully is going to be your guide on how to change that. So welcome, Lee. Really glad to have you on the show today to talk about a really important subject in healthcare business.
Thank you, Hakeem. Pleasure to be here, and thanks very much for inviting me.
No, my absolute pleasure. As I said, it's a critical part of the business, and we're just talking about it off air. So just to kick off, and you've obviously worked with lots of companies. So if you were looking, just giving some general advice about making big impact and making a big impact in healthcare, and it's a really broad question, and then I'll start going down narrow. What would that be if you had one thing that you said, right, you're getting into a healthcare business, or what's the one thing that you need to be focusing on?
Oh, that's a really difficult question because there's lots of things. I think for me, the key is aligning your exhibition strategy with your business growth plan. I think knowing why you exhibit and what it actually means for your business to go to that exhibition is the real starting point. Okay, we see, as we were talking earlier, we see a lot of companies who are exhibiting for the wrong reasons. And this is where they are making the first mistake. And they haven't got the right strategy. It's not aligned with the rest of the business, and it's in silo to the sales and the marketing strategy as well. So the real starting point for me should always be at the end of the previous year, really looking at what does our business growth plan look like, and how can we use exhibitions to actually escalate that business growth plan.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And as we said, there's few businesses that do that, and the ones that do obviously do stand out, and the ones that don't are just also rans when it comes to exhibition. So just tell me a bit more about Expo Stars and why you thought that was an important area to focus on, and why you thought actually it was a valid business idea.
Sure. Well, my journey started as an exhibitor back in 2007, where we went to an exhibition in Chicago. Now, at that time, I was working for a software company, and the managing director had actually booked the exhibition 2 weeks beforehand, so very last minute. And so we ended up taking this massive box with a pop-up, and we got there and we were positioned right at the back of the hall. And that gave me an opportunity. Obviously, we had very little traffic coming to our booth. So that gave me the opportunity to walk around the show. And what I realized that was that 70 to 80% of the exhibitors were being very passive. They were not proactive. They were just waiting for people to come to the booth. Their sales reps were on the mobile phone or they were on the laptop. And then when I was walking around, I got engaged by 3 or 4 exhibitors who had a very clear journey on the booth. They understood their target market. The booth staff were really well trained in terms of proactively engaging the attendees, asking qualifying questions, bringing them into the booth, and then taking them on that journey. And that's when the salesperson in me and the entrepreneur in me, the light bulb moment just happened. And I realized that there's an opportunity here, okay? Because if 70 or 80% of the hall is being very passive, I asked the question, why is that? Okay. And I came back to the UK. And my contract with the software company had actually just expired. And I thought, right, what do I do? And I kind of did some research for about 2 to 3 months. And then I started the idea that what exhibitors were lacking was the right people at the booth, and they were lacking education. Okay. Because the interesting thing here in the UK and in some parts of Europe and also in Asia is that there is no formal education on how to succeed at exhibitions. Even here with event management degrees at universities in the UK, there is very little coverage given to how to succeed at an exhibition as well. So if you have this lack of education and all the job roles, at companies that go to exhibit, okay, if you're not a specialist event manager or an exhibit manager, it might be that you're a marketing manager who gets told that you're also looking after the exhibitions, or it might be the sales director, or maybe the PA of the managing director who's looking after the whole setup as well. And these people, they don't actually have the knowledge or they don't actually have the experience to say, how do we strategize? What does the customer journey look like on the booth? What does the follow-up process look like? For them, they start with the first thing that happens is when companies decide to exhibit is, okay, let's focus on the booth design. Okay. And then it'll be that information, what the company has done before has always been passed down, and they will say, use the past, okay, to design the next exhibition. And it's that knowledge that's actually passed down, but there's no innovation. So a lot of companies doing the same thing year in, year out, and expecting the same results. Now, somebody said to me, that's the sign of madness.
Yes, it is.
So, and that's what and that's, where we started the company. First of all, we started hiring specialist presenters, actors and actresses to help exhibitors engage with the audience. And then gradually over the years, what I was realizing was that a lot of these companies, while they were hiring our booth staff, they didn't actually know how to make best use of them. And that, again, boils down to education on the strategy, on the customer journey on the booth, and so on. So this is how we've actually evolved over the past 18 years. And post-pandemic, we've now become a fully fledged exhibition performance company where we actually help companies to understand their attendee engagement strategy, okay, before, during, and after the event, and that we provide interpersonal communication skills to their booth staff, okay, to be able to proactively engage with the attendees, break the ice with them, qualify them, and take them on that journey during and after the event as well. And then lastly, we have a network of over 3,500 engagement professionals around the globe who can actually support exhibitors on the ground to do that face-to-face engagement if they don't have the right people in their team. So that's the story of Expo Stars. And it's been, for me, a big learning curve, okay, because we've worked with a lot of different business sectors. So from aviation to automotive to technology, pharmaceuticals. And one of the pleasures I get of running this business, I get to learn so much about other industries and how they're actually approaching trade shows. And some of the products that we've actually promoted, honestly, have completely blew my mind. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it as well. But one thing I can say is that success, as Anthony Robbins always says, success leaves clues. And over the past 18 years, what we've done is learn what works in terms of attendee engagement and what doesn't work. And the key thing that we've actually found is that it's all about the people. Okay. And if you take everything away, the fancy booths, the venues, it's about the customer looking for suppliers, okay, or a supplier looking for their customers. And what exhibitions is kind of a mechanism, if you like, to bring two people together. All right. And how badly do we get it wrong? That we don't even, some exhibitors don't even know how to say hello to their prospective clients.
Yeah, it's and have you seen, because obviously you've worked across many different industries, have you seen a difference in quality of exhibition performance across those, or is everyone just as good or just as bad as each other?
It varies across the industries. I mean, there are those, I think the biggest differentiation is that where companies actually have dedicated departments and they're not working in silos. So marketing, sales, the executive team, operations, and the event management team, if they're all working in cohesion, those are the companies that are really succeeding at their trade shows. And when you look at the small to medium sized businesses who don't actually have the expertise, then those are the type of companies that are really struggling with their exhibitions. So I think it's, again, boils down to the haves and the have nots.
Yeah. And what, so I mean, you talked, when you're talking through your story there, you talked about obviously going through the pandemic. So what did you do over the pandemic? Because obviously exhibitions weren't really happening in face to face at that point. How did you ride that storm?
Very good question. Well, first of all, there was denial, then there was panic, and then there was acceptance.
Hmm.
So, but what we did, obviously, exhibitions is our lifeline. It's our livelihood. So what I was able to do is obviously make some changes to the business, and I started. That's where the majority of the consulting started, and the training, because what I was able to do is kind of slightly pivot and go and do some consulting work with several companies in terms of helping them align their sales and marketing strategies. Because what we're finding, I'm not sure about yourself, Akeem, whether you've seen, is that marketing and sales have very much become intertwined. They're almost, one of the same now. But again, what we're realizing is that still to this day, there's a lot of companies where the marketing and the sales teams work in silos. They don't actually know what one or the other is actually doing. And that's how we actually survived. And we also got lucky in that there were pockets around the world that still actually had events. We have a very stable client base as well. So we were able to get one or two pieces of business that kept us afloat. And we got through it, and now trying to get back to partying like it was 29.
A Prince reference for those of you who don't, or the artist formerly known as Prince for those of you who don't get the reference. But yeah, so in terms of, and the whole point of this is looking at how the people perform better. So what would you say are, if you had two or three differences that you could identify and say, this is what a person who is present at a conference does, and this is what a person who performs at a conference does?
Yeah. So it's really joining the dots. Okay. So it's actually having a clear journey of understanding, number one, the why. Okay. So if someone is presenting a seminar, for example, first of all, they know why they're going, actually, what their message is that they're actually trying to get across and why they're trying to get that message across. Number two, they will actually know their target audience inside out, who they're actually presenting to. Number three, they will have a call to action, okay, at the end of the presentation. Okay, so what is the next step? Okay, and number four, they will actually have a follow-up process, okay, in terms of really looking at. And number five, they will actually have metrics in place. They will understand how many people they presented to, how many of those people want to take the conversation forward, Okay, and then benchmarking that all the way across. So the next time they do an exhibition or they do a seminar, they can actually look at those metrics and see how they actually performed. Okay, and then talking about metrics, I see obviously we're both very active on LinkedIn, and there's a lot of messaging going on there around metrics. There's a lot of fancy words and like a lot of fancy metrics being used. And for me, the key metrics have always been the conversion ratios. Okay. And there's nothing else really matters. Everything else for me is just, waffle, to put it mildly. So, I mean, what I want to know is, and the way that we support our clients is really look at the conversion ratios in that customer journey. Okay, so the first conversion ratio that we use is your people on the booth. How many approaches did they make to the attendees proactively? Okay, so how many hellos did they actually say? Okay, so and somehow to actually be able to capture that, and it can be as basic as keeping like a counter device. So every time you say hello to someone, you press the counter. Okay, and each salesperson actually gets this. And then you look at how many of those conversations, how many of those hellos converted into conversations, okay, like qualifications. So out of those, how many people were qualified and went through to a demo? Okay, because what that tells me is that if you say 10 hellos and you only have one person come through the demo, tell me one of two things. Either that booth rep hasn't been trained in terms of how to engage with people and start the conversation or ask the right questions, or it tells me that you're actually at the wrong show because you haven't got enough of the right people on the show floor. Yeah. So
Yeah.
And this is where the critical decisions actually come when you're actually looking at whether to decide to exhibit again at that show again for the next year. So you look at that conversion ratio. And then the second conversion ratio is looking at how many product demonstrations did you convert into follow-up meetings? Okay. And then that tells me if the conversion rate is low, then it means that obviously your team didn't qualify the attendees properly. And then the second thing is that, again, the presentations need work on. Yeah. And then that also boils down to the skill set of the product demonstrators as well. And then the call to action in terms of the follow-ups, you look at, how many marketing qualified leads you got and how many sales qualified leads you got. Okay. And there's two big differences. Okay. And one of the big things I see in the medtech world is the kind of, can I scan your badge attitude? Yeah. Companies doing that, what they don't realize is that relationships need to be built, okay? And they're not transactional. And can I scan your badge is one of the most transactional things that you can actually do at a trade show. Okay. And the focus should always be on building those relationships. Okay. And as I mentioned the process earlier, really to focus on, breaking the ice. Okay. And listening to the attendees on the show floor. Okay. And that's where the difference is. Okay. Because if you're treating everyone like a transaction, okay, your sales team are completely wasting their time. Okay. You might as well, instead of going to that MedTech conference, you might as well go on LinkedIn and call message everyone. And you would actually have the same impact. Okay. And by actually making that the attendee journey more human, what it allows you to connect, it allows you to listen, and it allows you to actually understand what the attendees' pain points are, and it allows you to personalize your message. If you listen and you personalize the product demonstration, okay, you're going to have a connection. And guess what? That leads to a better conversion in terms of the follow-up process. Yeah. So, and again, the argument I make is, would you rather have 20 qualified leads that are interested in setting up a follow-up meeting with you, or would you rather have 500?
Just on that note, because I suppose the question is, because I mean, one of the metrics you said was, picking the hellos. So until you've actually, firstly, you need to be at the right conference, because then the hellos are more likely that they're going to lead to something. But do you have any techniques to sort of like triage those quite quickly, to sort of like any tips to say, well, actually, I want to make sure that my hello leads to the follow-up. How do I do that rather than just getting loads and loads and loads of hellos? Because you can say hello to anybody, can't you?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And this is where, again, breaking the ice and having those qualification questions ready, okay,
Mm.
straight away. I mean, before the show, okay, get together with your team and say, right, what are the one or two key qualification questions that we can ask that will actually qualify people before we bring them into the booth? Now, we've had clients in the past who've actually closed their booth off, okay, completely. They've actually put rope and pillar outside of the booth, okay. It was actually at a MedTech conference in a CPHI in Barcelona. We were working with a MedTech company, and they actually hired two specialist engagers, and their sole job was to actually approach the attendees and ask them qualification questions, okay. And then if they were qualified, the rope would actually open and they would be invited in for a demonstration. Okay. And the difference was, mind blowing. Okay. Because that got rid of all the time wasters, got rid of all the freebie collectors. Okay. And the sales reps were having meaningful conversations with the right people.
That's a really so it's even that it's that idea of scarcity, isn't it? Because people, even the people at the conference, will be thinking, "Well, hang on, well, how do I get into that booth?" And you can't get into that booth. But as you said, the most important thing is, I mean, we all know that you go to conferences and they're just there for pens, pads, teddy bears, whatever else it is, and they're not really interested in the products. And you can actually tend to, even without speaking to people, you can see the ones that have got flipping 5 bags, hands full of bags, and you're thinking, right, okay, so they're not serious. They're just here to
Yeah.
get stuff for the grandkids.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a really nice methodology actually in terms of those qualification questions and actually then going down and having, and that's always my concern about is, well, how do you get the metrics? And as you said, more and more conferences are making it easier to scan badges or do
Yeah.
fancy things. So people
Yeah.
think, oh, that's great. And I've seen it and you'll have seen it. They come back from a conference. Oh, I've got 500 names. Right. Okay. So you're telling me that you've done none of that process you talked about. So we now have to dispassionately from here start contacting those 500 people. What an
Yeah.
absolute waste of time. It'd be better if
Yeah.
you said, no, I've got 20 follow-up calls with these 20 people. That to me is a successful conference, not 500 names, which is historically, I think, the old school way of doing things. So just moving on from that, bearing in mind it is such an expense, bearing in mind actually it's not rocket science to do the right things, because actually the things you're talking about are what a good salesperson would do in a call if they
Yeah.
went to see somebody face to face.
Yeah.
Why do you think that most, I'm not going to say most, lots of medtech companies invest so heavily in events but then walk away with nothing?
Yeah, it all boils down to one of five things. We call it the TEO process. You're familiar with SEO, search engine optimization. We call it TEO, which is trade show engagement optimization. And the reason why businesses are failing, not just medtech, but in every other sector as well, is they're not doing one of five things or a combination of things correctly. So one is obviously I talked about at the start of the conversation. One is having the right strategy, aligning the exhibition strategy with their sales and marketing plan or their business growth plan. The second is having a clear, defined journey before, during, and after the event for the attendees. And that starts from understanding who the target audience is, how you engage with them before the event, and what does that journey look like on the booth, and then what does that journey look like after the event. The third thing is lack of training and lack of briefing and selecting the wrong type of people to work on the booth. So in terms of the booth staffing, not having the right personalities, not allocating the right kind of job roles. I've seen many a time where the exhibitors have actually brought people from the shop floor and they're expected to engage with CEOs and CFOs and all of these kind of people. So, we're both business owners, and you wouldn't have a lawyer doing your accounting, would you? Or you wouldn't have your accounts team doing your sales. So why would exhibitions be any different? Okay, so if you need a person to go and say, to systematically approach people on the booth, then you need the right personality and the right skill set for them to be able to do that, and the right energy as well. Yeah, because as you said at the beginning, exhibitions are long hours, hard, they take the toll on your body, on your mindset, on your energy. So you need very strong willed people who can actually cope with the rejection. They can cope with non-stop talking for 10 hours, and they can actually cope with standing, on their feet. So it's really setting the expectations of what's actually required from your team to actually succeed before the event, and doing those briefings and having a really good management program on the booth. So some of the techniques that we use is that we have people doing 2 hours on, 2 hours off, so that they get, the respite. Okay, so that they can actually keep their energy up, and maybe have different people on different days, just to break it up. Because if you have 3 people working, we've got a long show coming up in Munich called Bauma, and that's an 8-day show. And if you imagine having a 4 or 5 person team doing this day in, day out for 8 days, I can imagine what they'll be like after the 8 days, right? So I think selecting the right team, training them, setting expectations, briefing them accordingly. A lot of companies don't do. They just expect people to turn up, stand around and just talk to people. All right. And it doesn't happen. The fourth bit is actually understanding the metrics, actually knowing what you actually want to get out of the exhibition. And the last bit is having a robust follow-up process, okay, from start to finish. So really understanding, okay, when we finish the conversation on the booth, what is the next step after that? Okay. And then, okay, after the show, what is the first step? Is it a follow-up email? Is it a telephone call? Okay, then what is the step after that? Okay, really looking at all of those processes right up until that person signs on the dotted line. Okay, so really the question is asked after we collect the data and we have the call to action at the end of the conversation, how does that then filter into our sales or marketing process? Okay, we were talking about a number of badge scans, and a lot of people said to me, well, yeah, but we're only at the expo for brand awareness. Okay, we don't really want those sales and things like that. We just want those names so that we can do our campaigns and stuff like that and put them into the marketing filter. That's all well and good, but if they're not the right kind of audience and you're just scanning everyone, what's the point? Okay. And if you do want to do that marketing funnel, then you need to be able to obviously look at, okay, what does that marketing funnel then look like? Okay. And this is where a lot of companies go wrong. So if you look at these 5 pillars within that 2-year process, you get any one of them wrong, or you don't plan it right, then you will fail. And if you get more than 2 of those pillars wrong, then it's a complete disaster.
So any one wrong and it's bad, and any 2 wrong and it's a disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well,
It's
if you think
interesting
about it, if you think about it, if you get the customer journey right and you get your strategy right, and then you've got your metrics, and then you've got your follow-up process, all perfectly planned, but the people on your booth are lousy. Yeah. So, and you can make that case for any one of those 5 pillars. Okay, so you can tick the boxes for 4 out of 5, but if one of them is way out, then you're not going to be successful.
And it's interesting you're saying that, when people say we're going for brand awareness, which is, I understand that's a legitimate approach, but you still have to go through those pillars, because the follow-up then is then your marketing channel, your marketing funnel. And you mentioned it earlier, there's probably, if all you're doing is brand awareness, in the day of digital expertise, there's a lot cheaper ways to get brand awareness than flying 5 people business class over to wherever, some far-flung part of the world, 30, 40 grand. If you've got 30 or 40 grand to spend for brand awareness, you can probably do better things than a badly organized exhibition.
Yeah.
So, and you made that point earlier. Get on LinkedIn. You'll get as many badges scanned on LinkedIn much quicker, with much more detail behind it, than just going to a conference to do that, which seems a bit. In fact, it seems very pharmaceutical, because pharmaceuticals always have loads of cash, so they're always looking at ways to reduce their profitability through such activities.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Now, obviously, pharmaceuticals have the challenge in terms of all the rules and regulations around commerciality and things like that. So, I mean, if anything, what we've actually found that the pharmaceuticals that we've worked with, they've always done a fantastic job in terms of the engagement because they know the rules. Okay, so
I was actually going to say that actually because
yeah, yeah,
I worked in pharmaceuticals for say 15 years before I moved into medtech, and I think that I learned most of my understanding of those because they always had an events manager who was
yeah,
basically saying, right, as you've just said there, this is the team. 3 hours on, 3 hours off. We're going to change the people. We need to have metrics. You know, it's not just about how many people you see. You know, they'd have
yeah.
like, well, and they'd have events that they were managing outside of that, and it was like planned like a military operation. Whereas you come into medtech, it's like the Wild West. You're thinking, oh, what are you doing? Why are you going there? Why are you even going to that
Yeah,
conference?
yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
I think one of the big challenges is that with medtech, again, it's all down to personalities. And you look at the founders of medtech, and they're technical people, okay, and they're not
yes.
sometimes not necessarily people, okay. So I think that's where the awareness needs to start. Is really understanding where the limitations are of that team in terms of personalities and organizational skills and industry knowledge. And if the knowledge isn't there in the team, bring in a specialist, okay, who can actually help you with that. Okay, there's no point doing it on your own and burning through a good part of your, hard-earned seed money or whatever it is. Because I've seen companies who've got an injection of cash from investors, and it's just blown. It's just like, where's that money gone? And it's just one bad decision after another, like exhibiting at the wrong show, and people just saying, right, we've got the money, let's spend it. Okay, and I think that's why we see a lot of failure points in businesses. And I think the scary statistic is that 85% go out of business within the first 3 to 5 years. I think it is.
Yeah, it is. I think in some industries it's even higher because I was looking at a report there that it's up to 90%, and I think you're right because the challenge I think, and this is like a completely different show, but the challenge is that people go into the business, they come out of a job. The first thing they do is they want to pay themselves the same salary they were on before, and
Yeah,
you're thinking,
yeah,
but you're not making that business you just came out of was turning over 200 million. You're turning over nothing, and you want to give yourself 150, 200 grand salary. Well, that's going to cause you problems. And then, as you said, they think, oh well, we've got the money because they've got £1 million or whatever. A
yeah,
million pounds in a medtech business, you'll burn through that very, very quickly if you're just squandering it. And an exhibition, what we were talking before, I've spoken to people who've sunk 50 to 100 grand into an exhibition. Now, that's a lot of money to put into something that you've got absolutely no outcome from, and you wouldn't do it
yeah,
in anything else.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
nothing that I can think of where you'd say I'm going to spend 100 grand and I've got no idea what the
yeah,
result is going to be.
yeah,
There's no return on investment
yeah,
apart from branding. And again,
yeah,
what does branding mean?
yeah,
How are you measuring that branding?
yeah,
What's the outcome of that branding? All those things. So I think exhibitions, certainly I've seen, is definitely one of those where you can lose a lot of money. But by the same token, which is why you've got a business and why we're conversing about it, if you do it right, it can be one of your most powerful engines of business because you do get to see a lot of people. And if you go into the right exhibition, a lot of the right people who are in the right place with your ideal customers. It would take you, especially if you're talking about international businesses, it would take you probably months, if not years, to get around all those people individually. And you'd have to be flying to all those places. If done right, it's very cost effective, but it has to be. And I really like your TEO, the trade show engagement optimization. I think those 5 pillars are really nicely put to say, actually, even if you're an idiot, you can look at each one of those and say, right, are
yeah,
we set up to do all those things?
yeah,
Even without your help, although obviously we suggest you get Lee's help, but even without you actually paying for your advice, you've given
yeah,
5 key pillars there that everyone should be looking at and saying, have we done these things? Check. Oh no, right. What? Don't do the exhibition until we've got that. So on that note, because I didn't realize at the time always disappears on these things because I'm always interested in what we're talking about. So if there was one simple shift companies could make to stand out and actually convert foot traffic, for example, into real opportunities, which is what we're talking about, what would that be? If you just said, right, do this one thing then, and that will elevate your trade show performance?
Tough question. The biggest difference is selecting the right people, I would say, on the booth, because we have to go back to the basics, okay, to answer this question. And the basic thing is that exhibitions are a human to human experience, okay? And if we don't have the right people on the booth, then we're not going to succeed. As a matter of fact, according to research done by the exhibition industry, 89% of your exhibition success depends on your people. It might be 85%, but it's a very high percentage. And it's all because people buy from people, and exhibitions are all about a people-to-people conversation. And if you don't get that right, okay, then you're going to fail. All right. And that's where the biggest disconnect is. And I can show you when I do my team training, lots and lots of pictures of booth staff engaging in the wrong kind of behavior. And if you get your team right, you've got the right people and they know what they're doing. They know their target audience. They know what qualification question they need to ask. They know their product demonstration pitch inside out. They know what data to collect and they know how to set up the follow-up process. Okay. You're on to a winner. And you know what? You can actually, if you have the right people, you can have a blank booth with no marketing paraphernalia at all. And you can just have people approaching people and you will still walk away with lots and lots of business.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really important thing to remember. It is people buying people. And I know, because I've been to loads of conferences and loads of exhibitions, and I've been with small businesses that have got nothing in terms of giveaways and all that great stuff, and just like a tiny little stand and just a little backdrop. And I've got more out of those than the ones where they're massive. They've got a flipping, double, got stairs going up into the sky. They've got all sorts of things and videos, and they don't get anything out of it. And that's, as you said, because of the people on the booth, actually, and the messaging that they're putting across, and the fact they're trying to interact with people, as opposed to just badge scanners. I think that's a good place on which to end, because I think people interacting with people is what a conference and an exhibition is all about. And if you get that right, you'll be successful. And if you don't, then you're not going to be that successful. So no, I really appreciate you coming on. I thought, I was pretty good at exhibitions, but I've learned, I've been taking notes all the way through. I've learned a shed load, and I think anyone who's listening or watching would have learned loads as well. So no, really appreciate your time, Lee.
Thank you very much, Hakeem. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you again at another networking event.
You will. Absolutely love this episode. The amount of conferences that I've been to with companies that aren't effective. This is a must listen. And if you take nothing else out of it, remember the trade show engagement optimization plan. You've heard of SEO, now you've heard of TEO. I really like that. Alignment, defined journey, training, metrics, and then a follow-up. And Lee, off air, basically said he's got lots of checklists and documents that you can use to help you before you go to your next conference. So definitely drop me a line to ensure that you get hold of those. And don't forget to pick up the show notes over at thesalesaccelerationformula.com/podcast-show-notes. You'll also find an option to subscribe to our mailing list so that you can get notes for every single episode straight to your inbox. While you're at it, don't forget to tune in to next week's episode of my new 5 in 5 series, where I share 5 actionable takeaways in just 5 minutes from this episode, which will help you supercharge your business growth. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this podcast with your friends, colleagues, and anyone else who might find it valuable. Most importantly, keep the feedback coming so we can keep improving and bringing you more of what you love. Thank you very much for tuning in. And remember, keep listening, keep growing, and keep thriving.